Hello, everyone. My name is Gretel Follingstad, and I am a PhD candidate at the University of Colorado, Denver, as well as an instructor at the University of Colorado, Denver's Planning School, the College of Architecture and Planning, as well as an instructor at University of Colorado, Boulder, the Masters of the Environment program. I am also a business owner called Terra Planning LLC, and have been doing water planning for over 10 years now. Today I'm going to talk to you about collaborative agreements and the power of collaboratives for Aurora, Colorado. I will share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen okay. This presentation is called Power of Collaboratives for Water Resilience, and it's a case study for Aurora, Colorado. So this study looked at collaborative agreements for Aurora Water from the time period of 2010 through 2019 as a means of securing water adequacy for growth and stability. These graphs show you basically that Aurora is seeing, like many Front Range communities, very intense population and development growth, and that is paired with increasing water use and water demand. As a newer city, in comparison to, say, Denver, Aurora holds a minority share of senior water rights. So the majority of their water is junior water rights, which leaves them vulnerable to priority calls in times of drought. Here you will see a summary of the Upper Colorado Basin hydroclimate trends, basically calling for temperature to increase, precipitation to decrease, snowpack, water volume also decreasing. Timing of runoff from snowmelt will start becoming earlier and earlier, and annual stream flow will decline due to warming temperatures. All of this has severe effects on water supply and water resource adequacy for future growth. This graph shows you Colorado's projected water supply and demand gaps through the year 2050. Basically denoting that there needs to be many strategies in place to meet coming and current demand for water. One tool that we have in our toolbox as water planners is the power of collaborative agreements to create that resilience, basically working together for shared goals. So some of the characteristics of collaboratives and partnerships are they engage a broad or wide variety of stakeholders. They include an engagement process, and that can be at many different scales. It can be at the full community or regional scale. It can also just be between different agencies. They share a common goal, and through that common goal, create consensus about problem solving. And they also commit to responsibilities or ownership and roles around that problem solving. The collaborative decision-making process can be lengthy, but basically it aims to construct greater competence in resource sharing, fostering positive rapport between stakeholders, and creating innovative solutions to governance challenges. Cross-sector collaboration, of course, is one of our greatest tools, and that allows for multidisciplinary teams to work together. So you bring science, along with policy, you bring different expertise to best inform collaborative solutions and partnerships for that problem solving. Through that process, you create goals in your collaborative to improve policy and programs through partnership, also improve capacity for the agency itself, or entity itself, as well as the system. So that can be capacity for natural systems, it can be capacity for built environment systems, and it can be capacity for the agency itself. And also to adapt to both new circumstances as well as the environment of the problem-solving situation. Collaboratives are aimed to bring stakeholders together to work towards a win-win policy solution and to integrate economic and environmental goals to focus on local participation or local problem solving. So they innovate and create new approaches, they diffuse vulnerability or threats to an issue, and they allow for adaptation to all needs and circumstances given in any given problem. There are certain sort of levels or standards to meet in a collaborative process. One is procedural, where it is an inclusive and creates responsible participation for all people or entities involved in the partnership. It is substantive, and there are common goals that depend on valid approaches with solid information sharing. As well as practical. In practice, the common interest depends on experience and supports the expectations for the goals. For this study, I followed the climate resilience framework for water resilience. And the logic model is that given the problem of water scarcity and drought, it creates uncertainty and vulnerability for our water supply. And that requires collaboration and adaptation to these circumstances, which results in a more resilient community for water adequacy. The framework, the climate resilience framework for assessing Aurora's collaboratives includes 3 major sectors that are basically analyzed to determine resilience. And those include illustration of systems resilience, which is flexibility and diversity within the system, redundancy and modularity, and safe failure. This can be the natural system or the built system. Illustration of agent capacity resilience, which is the ability of the agency to respond, how resourceful they are in terms of meeting the needs for change or creating new services, programming, and capacity to learn from failures or mistakes or circumstance. So that could be such as a drought or a hazard, like a flood. Characteristics of institutional resilience include rights and entitlements, decision-making, information gathering, and application of new knowledge to improve the institution or agency. For this study, there are 549 government agreements that were coded, and the primary categories that were looked at were systems resilience, agent capacity resilience, and characteristics of the institutions. Again, this is a first stab at the analysis of this data. And I'll start with the types of collaboratives that we saw over the 9-year period for Aurora. In orange here, you can see our public-private partnerships or public-private collaboratives. Those are consistently high throughout the 9-year period. One that fluctuates is interagency, which is at the municipal level. That usually means that the agency is collaborating with another municipal level agency on infrastructure projects or the like. The public-private partnerships tend to be agricultural partnerships or entities for ditch sharing. The yellow is the intragovernmental or regional to state level governance. And as you can see in 2013, there is a high instance of that, which I think was mainly stemming from the 2013 flood. The intergovernmental or federal level partnerships tend to be lower, though those usually are aimed around endangered species or stream flow health. And the nonprofit and NGO watershed groups sort of consistently was below the 10% mark of the agreements that were analyzed per year. Next, we looked at water systems. Again, this is percent of total annual agreements for each year through the year 2019. Again, for the predominant water systems agreements that we saw were for water infrastructure, which makes sense. Aurora has the WISE program and the Prairie Waters program, which are intergovernmental agreements for water sharing and common goals for meeting water adequacy in times of scarcity. Other consistent ones are water supply, which makes sense, and those actually correlate to some degree to drought years. 2016 was a drought year. 2017 saw more agreements surrounding water supply, for example. And the other predominant element there is water use and demand. Interestingly, also 2018 was a relatively dry year, and we saw more collaborative agreements surrounding water demand in 2019. We decided to look at water supply adequacy, again, as a percent of total agreements over the span of years, which also to some degree correlated to drought years. For example, in 2013, there was over 75% of the agreements were about water adequacy, or touched on water adequacy to some degree, addressed it to some degree, which is post drought year. We saw that again in 2018. The other years, and 2016, which was a drought year. So you can see that the water adequacy level of innovation tends to be higher post drought years. The next slide shows areas of capacity building. So how the agency is building capacity to meet goals within their planning programs. Capacity can be in planning, it can be in programming, policy, physical, and other. And predominantly you see from this graph that physical, which would include infrastructure and planning, are the most, take the most percent of agreements per year, indicating that most of their partnerships over the course of each year pertain to planning for water, as well as creating physical agreements that relate to physical entities, such as infrastructure. Next, we looked at the range of financial capacity building, and there were many different variables that we saw in these documents that ranged from pooling resources to sharing costs, lease fees to project fees, collaboratives between partners, tax and bond measures, as well as rate structuring or payment of water rates. So this graph shows you the outcomes from that analysis. And predominantly, we're seeing a lot of sharing costs throughout every year. 2017 and 2014 have predominantly other categories, meaning there were quite a few agreements in those years that related to financial capacity, but they fell within unique areas that were not specifically coded for these documents. Lease fees also tended to be consistently high throughout the 9-year period, and those lease fees are when Aurora generally is buying up water rights from agricultural entities and leasing that water back so that it is continuously put to beneficial use before Aurora needs it in its own portfolio for supplying the city. Next was looking at agency agility to changing conditions. The changing conditions that we analyzed were water scarcity, flood, drought, high temperatures, and infrastructure. Water scarcity is in orange, and as you can see, that also correlates to post-drought year periods. In addition, we see high temperatures consistently over the course of the year. In 2016, we see flood, interestingly, and that is probably shoring up stormwater infrastructure. Next, we looked at water utility services and programs capacity. This is similar to water systems. However, it's looking at just the services and programs capacity within the agency. What we see predominantly here in orange is water delivery. So that means infrastructure, making sure that new development is piped in, as well as addressing aging infrastructure for either stormwater storage or delivery systems. In yellow, infrastructure is also in there. So that would be infrastructure that relates to supply and conveyance, not as much stormwater management, which is in, I'm sorry, stormwater infrastructure is in yellow, stormwater management is in gray, and water delivery is in orange. Pardon. So next steps for this research are to take a deeper dive and look at this data to determine Aurora's level of resilience in terms of how it compares to other communities that have used the same climate resilience framework for looking at water resilience and water agency resilience specifically. Thank you very much. If you would like to send me any questions, I don't have a slide up here with my email, but it is available through the Sustaining Colorado Watersheds Mallory at Sustaining Colorado Watersheds. Thank you.